Hi everyone, welcome to a paper 1 preparation video. This is a video that I've had on the channel before, but so many things have changed in the last 4 years, and it's in particular when it comes to exam technique and what I kind of recommend, that I wanted to do a redone version of this with a lot less focus on exam technique, because I've got other videos on the channel that'll do that. But would allow maybe students who are more recent to be able to access this video a little bit shorter without some of that kind of repeated content. So I'm going to do all three of these. Paper 1 and paper 2 are going to be more paper specific. Paper 3, because there's a pre-release, there's a new paper 3 video every single year, and so this one will come out before the paper 3 exam. So paper 1, covering theme 1 and theme 4, I'm going to go through the basics, and then I'm going to talk about the links that I've been able to make between theme 1 and theme 4. So this isn't going to be a straight revision kind of content thing. There's bits of that, and there's elements where you'll pick up some key terminology and what have you. That's also going to be on the channel pretty soon with some other format videos, but which by the time you watch this might already be on there. And if so, I'll link them into the comment section in the description of this video. But it's going to be more about how to approach this paper, what to look for from this paper, and what to look for when you're doing your revision in terms of the kind of links between the two themes. So before we go any further, let's focus on the basics for paper 1. So this is the same structure in terms of papers as you will see in paper 2. So 2 sections, section A and section B, and they are both worth 50 marks each. 100 marks in total, so both sections have 2 4 markers, a 10 marker, a 12 marker, and a 20 marker. And so the idea behind this in terms of timing is you should try and complete one section in 1 hour, because, I mean, it's 50 marks in each section, so if you do the first section in an hour, you're on time to do the second section as well. And obviously if you spend more than an hour on the first section, you're going to find yourself rushing towards the end of section B, and the last thing you want to be doing is getting to that last 20 marker and finding that you haven't got enough time to complete it, because I mean, it goes without saying, 100 marks, so that 20 marks is worth 20% of the entire paper. So try and spend about a mark a minute. That would give you about 10 minutes spare in each section. And you'll probably need that the most for the 10 and 12 markers. I think 4 markers are pretty straightforward to do in 4 minutes. 20 markers, I think, are really straightforward to do in 20 minutes. But those 10 and 12 markers, you might have quite a lot to say. And so making sure you're on point with your timing is really, really important. Now, in this paper, you are given 2 sets of extracts, one for section A, one for section B. As of this year, so I'm recording this in 2023, you will be given the extracts in a separate booklet, whereas in the past, and so if you've been looking at past papers, maybe if you've done mocks in class, they might not have had a separate booklet for the extracts. You will get a separate booklet for the extracts, which I think makes it a lot easier, because you can have the extracts open on your desk, on your exam desk, while you're going through your questions, rather than having to keep flicking back and finding things. So make sure you're using your extracts in every single question. Now, you got to consider how you're going to approach the case study. Some students like to read the whole case study first. My advice would be to read the questions for that section first, and then read the case studies after you've read the questions. And as you're going through the case studies, just making a little note about which questions you might be able to use those answers for. So, for example, if you're looking at, if you've got a question on a dynamic market, and you know that that's the 12 marker, when you see anything that suggests the market is dynamic, make a note of that in your case study. And that means that when you get to those questions a little bit later on, yes, it might take a few more minutes at the start, but when you get to those questions later on, it'll save you a ton of time, because you won't have to retrace through several case studies and paragraphs. You'll be able to know exactly which bits you're looking at. So the key messages there are really focus on your timing and really focus on how you approach your case studies, because they are essential if you want to get good marks on this paper. In terms of structure, I'm going to be really brief with this, because I have got a playlist on the channel of structure for 4 markers, 10 and 12 markers, and 20 markers. Very briefly, I'll go through these. For a 4 marker, when you're doing a written 4 marker and explain how question, you make your point, explain the effect on the business, and then use 2 bits of application. For 4 mark, it's a point-based mark scheme, so you need to do each of those 4 things to get those 4 marks. If it's construct, so for example, theme 1, you could get a supply and demand curve. You need to draw the graph. You need to make sure it's fully labeled. It's pretty clear how to get the 4 marks. I believe I cover that in the 4 mark video, so have a look at that, which will be linked in the description. And I'll try and put a link on the video here at this point, if I'm technically literate enough to do that on YouTube, so you can have a look at that as well. And if it's a calculation, make sure you show you're working out, make sure you use your formula, and make sure you're really clear on the units required in the answer. So for example, if it's a percentage, put a percentage. If it's in pounds or euros or whatever, put that unit in there as well. And be careful with your decimal places as well. Most of the time they ask for 2 decimal places. But just that'll be in the question, so make sure you know what you're looking for. With a 4 marker, that's a calculate question or a construct question as well. One thing to keep an eye out for is that they actually ask you, they tell you which case study to look at, which is something that I think will be quite helpful as well. For the 10 and 12 mark questions, I've put definition. I don't tell students to write a definition. I don't think it's necessary. However, if you feel like it helps you focus on the key term in the question, that's absolutely fine. You just need one each paragraph here. Your paragraphs should balance. So your point, if say for example it's assess the impact, your point should be positive, however negative. It could be however negative, however, and it could be negative, then however positive. That's fine, as long as you've got both, because you need to have balance for evaluation marks. If it's an assess the importance question, is important, however isn't important. So just one each paragraph is needed. Then a conclusion. I suggest using a Disco M or some sort of justification like that. Maybe like a success depends on, it depends on, a short term, long term, a cost impact, something like that, as well as making your decision, just to make your evaluation a little bit more basic than saying, in conclusion, I think it has a positive impact and this is why. If you're wondering what the difference is between a 10 and 12 mark question, I mean, you get an extra mark for your analysis and your evaluation in a 12 mark question. However, I don't think that's worth enough to write an entirely second paragraph. I just don't think that's worthwhile. I don't think it's an effective use of your time. And so I would just say write with one each paragraph. If you write with 2, then you have a risk where your first however ends up being maybe your better negative point, and then you write in a second paragraph and you're trying to be negative and you've used your best point already. I just think it overcomplicates things, and I don't think it's necessary. So for the 10 and 12 mark questions, one each paragraph and a conclusion, that should be doable in 10 minutes or 12 minutes. And then the 20 marker, I think these questions are the easiest on the paper in terms of structure. If you know your key terms, you're laughing really. You've got 2 options. You have to make the argument for and against each of those 2 options. So you do that with 2 each paragraphs. 1, for and against option 1. You're against obviously being your however. Paragraph 2 is going to be your second each paragraph, for and against the second option. Again, you're against is going to be the however, and then a conclusion. And the key thing with that conclusion is you have to make sure you make a clear choice. You can't say both of them could be right. Even if that's what you think, just choose one. Choose the one that you think you've got the best justification for. So straightforward questions in terms of structure. So they make it a little bit more complicated by adding a little bit of a kind of focus or a hook to the question. So it might say that the business is trying to achieve profit. It might say the business is trying to achieve increased market share. Make sure your answer links to that. So, for example, if you're focused on profit, then talk about things that might create profit or might not create profit if you're doing it. However, if it's about market share, don't talk about profit necessarily. Talk about increasing their percentage of the market sales. That's the focus. You've got to be aware of the objective of the business. And that will be in the question. And so make sure you've got that in your 20 marker. So again, I'm not going to do any more than that on structure. There's other videos for that, which will be linked in the description below. So let's get on to the main bit. Theme 1 and Theme 4 have a huge amount of links between them. Some of them are really quite obvious. So for example, if you think about Theme 1 is about marketing and human resources, well, 4.3 in Theme 4 is about global marketing. So there's a really clear link there. And there's a few links between human resources in terms of recruitment and staffing within these global markets as well. So I think one of the main motivations behind these 2 units being together is, and it depends on how your school teaches these units, but certainly we teach Theme 1 first and Theme 4 last. And so I think that works quite nicely because it means that the first stuff you've covered in the start of year 12 is the knowledge that's the furthest into the past, whereas the Theme 4 stuff is the most recent, and so you're probably able to focus your revision a little bit more towards Theme 1 rather than Theme 4, because you should be pretty good on Theme 4 given you've only just covered it. So it's just a case of making sure that we can identify these 2 units, these 2 themes are put together for a reason. And when we get into the paper 2 video, which I'm going to re-record as well, there's some really clear links between theme 2 and theme 3, notably on finance. And so if these two units were put together for a reason, those reasons need to be explored. And so that's what this video is aiming to achieve. It's looking at the links between theme 1 content and theme 4 content, because I'm willing to bet that they're taught in isolation. So we're going to look at 3 main areas here. We're going to look at marketing strategy on a global scale. We're going to look at people management on a global scale, and we're going to look at ethics in managing people and marketing globally. We're not going to go too deep on ethics, because ethics is a theme 3 topic, but ethics is also in theme 4. So there are going to be elements of ethics that are going to be approached when it comes to studying global markets and answering questions about global markets. So the first topic to have a look at is one of our theme 4 marketing topics, which is the difference between ethnocentric, polycentric, and geocentric approaches to marketing. So obviously our marketing is about how we raise awareness with our products and our brands, and make those and make our customers in different markets make decisions. And so generally speaking, when a business goes globally with a product, they have one of 3 different approaches. So these key terms are some of the more specific key terms in theme 4. So it's really important that you know the difference between them, because they could come up explicitly in a question. It could ask specifically about ethnocentric, polycentric, geocentric, etc. It could be a 20 marker where it asks which is the best approach. Or it could be more subtle, where they're just talking about different marketing approaches of different countries, and the examiners are expecting you to be able to command these words. So ethnocentric, the first approach, this is the approach where a brand believes that their approach to marketing will carry over into any global market. And this is usually going to be the case for businesses that have some sort of luxury feel to them. So for example, and even then they may make some changes, but like if say for example a business has a really particular marketing brand, such as for example a business like Burberry, where their brand is built around being British, there would be no need to adjust that into different countries, because that might actually diminish their British brand image, if that makes sense. So an ethnocentric approach is where a business believes that they can use the same marketing approach. So we think about our marketing in terms of our 4 Ps, and they can take that to any country, and it should have some level of success. Polycentric is the opposite of that. Polycentric is where you are focused on adapting your marketing approach for each market that you enter. And this is probably going to be the case where your product has less differentiation, and therefore you as a business will need to compete in different markets and need to find ways to make your products appeal to those different groups of consumers. You don't have one image that is going to transcend those differences between tastes and cultures, which we'll talk about in a little while. You are going to adapt your product, your promotion, potentially your pricing, definitely, and how maybe you distribute your products as well. And then the geocentric approach is a little bit of a mixed approach, where you will try and take take advantage of anything you can transfer from one country to another in terms of your marketing. So, for example, maybe your products don't need to be developed. You take a business like Apple, for example, for the most part, their products are the same for their different markets, but they will change the way they advertise them. They will change their pricing strategies potentially, although, to be fair, they're probably going to be high priced. It's just going to be relative to the level of income. So that geocentric approach tries to take a best of both worlds. So likely if you get asked a question about this, it might be more leading towards ethnocentric or polycentric approaches, because they're the ones that contrast a little bit more. But a geocentric approach is important as well to understand that. I mean, a business in a perfect world would want an ethnocentric approach, because an ethnocentric approach means you don't have to do as much adaptation. That's going to reduce costs. That's going to make it much, much easier to transfer your products to different countries. But if you can't do that, maybe the geocentric approach is the second best option, because naturally having to adapt everything is going to take a huge amount of research and development. It's going to take a huge amount of time. It might impact on profit margins, and therefore make movement into different countries a little bit more risky, perhaps. So when we think about entering our new global markets, and this is kind of an extension of the previous section, businesses have to adapt their marketing mix, or may have to adapt their marketing mix for any new market they go into. So if we think about our marketing mix, we think about product, price, place, and promotion. But let's just think about how they might adapt these things. So for example, the product, that could be different countries' tastes or requirements. So for example, it could be, we've got Coca-Cola on the screen there. The brand, Coca-Cola, when they take their products into different countries, they might adapt things like the size of their bottles, the size of their cans, whether they use cans or bottles, to adapt to the fact that actually in certain countries maybe people consume drinks in a smaller quantity or bigger quantities perhaps. So they may make changes to their product design to accommodate that. They may, and obviously Coca-Cola's got a wide range of products, they may have more healthy options that they might target in certain areas based around healthy standards and what have you. Price is an obvious one. Price, you're going to have to make amendments due to differing income levels. That much is obvious. And so, obviously, a product that's sold for £500 in the UK, that you can't just translate that straight over into different currencies. You have to take into account the cost of living. You have to take into consideration the amount of disposable income that people in different countries have. And so pricing obviously will have to be adapted. One way to think about that would be potentially to look at competitors. If there are competitors in the market already, you might be able to have a look at what their pricing is and make amendments to yours to suit. In terms of place, there's a wide range of parts of 4.1 and 4.2 that come up here. So, for example, we'd study on theme 4 a lot about infrastructure and how easy it is to transport goods and services and deliver in different countries, especially in more emerging economies. So that has to be considered in terms of where the best place to sell products are. In the UK, for example, we're very lucky that we have great infrastructure. It's really easy to get to big cities. It's really easy to get around the country. And that makes it easier for businesses to transport goods around the country as well. But in other countries, it might not be as easy as if countries, depending on their kind of landscape, they might have fewer cities. They might be far more rural. And so as a result, they may have to change the way they sell their products. The other consideration to make in terms of infrastructure is infrastructure also includes things like access to the internet. And so how much online access does a country have? If you're an e-commerce based business or you're a business that looks to take advantage of e-commerce, that's going to be a consideration you have to make when you determine how you approach e-commerce in a different country. And then promotion just must be suitable for different audiences. And so there's been, I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later when we do a little bit on ethics in different countries, but there are plenty of examples of different countries that have different beliefs, and therefore certain adverts that might be suitable in one country might not be suitable in another. So in terms of tastes and trends and culture, there's going to be differences in different countries in terms of trends. This has made a huge difference in different marketing decisions. And it's less of a fact that when it comes to high differentiation businesses, we talk about Apple as an example, and I'll talk about some adaptations that Apple did make, but it's going to have less of an impact with them because if the brand is powerful and is a global brand, then consumers are going to want that product irrespective of potential differences that they might have made. And in fact, actually, sometimes they won't necessarily want a product if it's been too clearly adapted, especially if that brand image has come from their reputation in developed countries. But one really powerful example, which is it's going quite a way back now, but when Apple really started to make the push into China, one of the adaptations that they made to their iPhones is I think it was the iPhone 5C, which was the first iPhone that started to be produced with different coloured back, the back of the phone, rather than typically being kind of black or silver, which the iPhones in America and in Europe were. They introduced like a bunch of brighter colors. And one of the main reasons for that was when they did their research in the Asian market, they found that the Asian consumers were more interested in those brighter colors. And again, that's just an example of differences in tastes and trends that might have prompted a business to, in this case, adopt a little bit more of a geocentric approach where products are the same, but they've made one small adjustment to try and take advantage of a sort of a particular interest or trend that a certain market had. So this can make a really big difference when it comes to marketing decisions and you're choosing your marketing mix. Now, if we talk about people management next, 4.1 talks a lot, especially at the start of 4.1, when you talk about the difference between emerging economies and developed economies, there's a huge amount of focus on the differences between different labor markets. And this is down to a variety of factors. Skill shortages is one, the level of education within a country and literacy standards. That is going to have a huge amount of impact on the jobs that are available for different countries. In particular, one really, really big link here is the difference between when we think about an emerging economy, a lot of their jobs will be primary industry. And obviously we know primary industry jobs are incredibly important because they provide resources that we can then use for business or for consumption if it's items like food and what have you. But they're also the lowest paid and require the lowest level of education and level of skill. And so as a result, in some of those emerging economies, there's still quite a lot of poverty from a lot of those job areas. So there's the primary industry in the emerging economies. And then as these economies are developing, they are becoming more industrialized. So 4.1.1, when we talk about growing economies, we talk a lot about industrialization and how economies are moving not necessarily away from primary, because they're still going to have a lot of primary. If you've got a lot of natural land, you're going to have a lot of primary industry, but moving more towards secondary, which is manufacturing. We've seen China's the best example of that. China has become probably the manufacturing center of the world, and Asia as well, more broadly, because of their ability to develop infrastructure for manufacturing, but also because of the fact that their wage rates are really low by Western standards. And so businesses can produce at a much cheaper level in these markets. And if you can produce at a cheaper level, naturally, you're going to then be able to sell for a higher price for the same price and maybe make more of a profit margin, or potentially lower your prices and attract the level of demand that would increase due to that. So thinking about literacy standards, thinking about education standards, thinking about why is it that in the UK, we're a very tertiary industry based economy. And there's a variety of reasons for that. We don't have a great deal of natural resources. So there's a lot of things we can't make here, even if we wanted to. We have high wage rates comparatively. And so as a result, it becomes quite expensive to manufacture here relative to other places. And also we have high levels of education. And so you think about some of the leading industries, the areas where we lead the world in terms of industry, the likes of literature, architecture, pharmaceuticals. These are all areas that require finance as well. These are areas that require a high level of education. And so countries tend to take advantage of what their labor standards are. So this obviously links to people management, because when we think about recruitment and selection, or when we think about recruiting for our job or managing our human resources, which kind of staff do we want? Are we going to be adopting a more global approach to our staffing to try and take advantage of lower costs elsewhere, for example? And there's obviously a link between 1.4, where we talk about recruitment, training, motivation, and all of those things, and then the differences that will require in terms of the global markets. So recruitment and selection I've just mentioned, but there's obviously a few other more specific parts to this as well. So there is the differences in terms of legal procedures and requirements, mostly in terms of legislation, for example, like the areas such as wage rates and minimum wage and living wage and health and safety at work and employee rights and union membership. Those kind of standards and those kind of requirements are vastly different in different countries. And so it's really important that businesses are aware of the different requirements, but also hopefully not taking advantage of them. And then there's also two terms that are introduced in Theme 4 when it comes to a business that's growing abroad. So for example, outsourcing and offshoring. So outsourcing is where you pay a company to do the work for you, whereas offshoring is if you just move operations abroad, but you do it yourself. And so a really good example of this that became really prominent was a lot of businesses moved call centers and customer service centers to different countries because they were able to pay staff a lot less to do so. And obviously customer service isn't always necessarily a revenue generating part of the business. And so there isn't always an incentive to provide the really high levels of standards that you'd like to hope you expect. The problem with this was, of course, that it had a huge impact on reputation, because you were quite often with outsourcing and offshoring, sometimes you're potentially ensuring that your customer service is delivered by members of staff who aren't maybe as experienced with your business, maybe don't know the products as well, don't know the market, don't know the customers as well, and therefore that can have an impact on the level of customer service that is delivered. So just another thing just to link there, when it comes to recruitment and selection and businesses choosing where to locate, these are important considerations. And I know that in 4.2, there is a topic about assessment of a country as a production location. Well, that's what this is about. Where are we going to have our staff? In particular, our manufacturing staff. The last part of this is ethics. And so obviously I touched on this briefly when we talked about promotion in the marketing section, but there are some ethical issues regarding this as well. So for example, some approaches are just different in different markets, and 4.3 touches on this. But there's like attitudes towards alcohol, for example. In certain countries, it's not widely drank in the same way that it is in certain countries, and so advertisements that might work in one country will definitely not work in another. Other examples are attitudes towards animals. So I can't remember the name of the business, but there was a company that had an advert that involved a dog being part of the family, as is really common, obviously, in the United Kingdom and the US, etc. But in other countries, they're not actually perceived in that way. In other countries, dogs are more commonly seen on the streets as sort of more wild animals, and so to transport one representation of dogs in a household to a different market might not necessarily work if it doesn't match with their ideals. And obviously in terms of style of dress as well, I know there was a Pepsi advert involving some people on a beach playing beach volleyball, and you could take that advert into different countries, and it potentially could be quite offensive in countries where more modest dress is the norm in terms of culture. So businesses have to be aware of these differences between different countries when they're thinking about how they market their products in different countries. Being aware of your market means that you hopefully avoid offending anyone, and naturally offending someone in a different market can have a massive impact on reputation. The last topic here, and the last link, and a really, really big one here, is when we think about labor practices and we think about global ethics. There's a huge link here. In developing economies, standards are lower, and there's a variety of reasons for this. This involves legislation primarily, different forms of governance and what have you. Sweatshops are quite common in certain countries. Child labor is common in certain countries and certain industries. For example, Nestle. I've got a Nestle example there in the corner. Well, Nestle have on a regular basis been found to have had poor treatment of workers and have been found to have child labor on their farms in certainly in African countries. And so there's a big ethical question there regarding the ethics of a business, their reputation, but also their desire to keep their costs low and make profit. And the trade-off trade-off is, of course, a topic in theme 1, which makes this link even more important. The link between profit and ethics, and the balance between getting those two things right. And a lot of the businesses that we know and love, perhaps like Nestle and Primark, don't necessarily always get this right. And so I guess one particular area of discussion will be, when it comes to legal requirements being different, does that make it difficult for businesses to know what is fair in certain countries? And actually, we could look at a business that pays workers an incredibly low wage in a different country and think that's unethical. But if actually that wage is a fair wage for that country, then it might not be perceived as unethical. It might just be that a business taking advantage of different law and also providing jobs and providing income to people in those countries, which is obviously not a negative. And then think about the overriding impact of all of that on a business's reputation. So if a business is perceived as being unethical, that potentially could have a negative impact on their reputation. On the other hand, if they're perceived as being ethical, that could have a really positive impact. More likely in a niche market, I think ethics is a really important factor for consumers, but not necessarily the most important factor that they'll consider when they make their decisions. So there's a variety of links between theme 1 and theme 4. Hopefully this has given you a little bit of an idea as to what those links might be. I am going to, over the next week or so, hopefully, maybe even sooner, upload some revision videos, content-based, just sort of brief recaps for theme 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to do themes 1 and 4 first, because paper 1, which is theme 1 and 4, is the closest paper to when I'm recording this. If I've already uploaded those by the time you're watching this, which hopefully will be the case, then have a look in the description, because I will put links to those videos there, or a link to the playlist where I'm going to upload them. So hopefully you found this interesting. If you have any questions about paper 1, theme 1, or theme 4, please leave them in the comments and I'll get to as many as I can. And good luck when the exam comes.